Hello fans and friends, and welcome to another video. My name's Keir Smith. For today's video we're going to be looking at 10 albums that changed their title. 10 albums we all know and love that at one point could have been called something very different. So popular are most of these albums that I'm about to show that it's hard to imagine them being called anything else. These are in no particular order, so I'll start my list with this. This is Armed Forces by Elvis Costello and the Attractions from 1979, which was going to be called Emotional Fascism until the last minute. Drummer Pete Thomas coined the title Armed Forces, and this is said to have continued Costello's theme of control and domination over both governing and individual bodies. There you go. Up next we have Black Sabbath Volume 4 from 1972. And this was going to be called Snowblind, which of course is one of the song titles on the album. And it's a none too subtle reference to the band's fondness of the Devil's Dandruff. But of course the record company didn't like that, and so they changed the title to Black Sabbath Volume 4 without even telling the band apparently. Rock and roll, eh? Next we have Abbey Road by the Beatles from 1969. And this was going to be called Everest, which was a name the band picked from the brand of cigarettes that engineer Jeff Emerick smoked. And then the band had the idea to fly to the Himalayas and have their photo taken in front of Mount Everest. But none of the band were too keen on the long flight, and so they decided to take a leisurely stroll outside EMI Studios across the zebra crossing on Abbey Road, and Abbey Road it is. Next we have Hail to the Thief by Radiohead from 2003, and this is an album title that underwent many changes. It was going to be called The Gloaming, which again is a title of a song on the album. Little Man Being Erased was an option. Snakes and Ladders was another option, but Hail to the Thief it is. Next we have Mezzanine by Massive Attack from 1998, and this was called Mezzanine to give the impression of no man's land, the Twilight Zone, a floor between floors, and this dark album was going to be called Damaged Goods. And I don't know if the two are connected, but coincidentally Damaged Goods is the name of the debut single by Gang of Four. Next up we have The Clash, London Calling from 1979, and this album was going to be called The Last Testament. The band had the idea that this was going to be the last rock album. But the typography of the album title here mimics Elvis Presley's debut album, which was considered the birth of rock and roll. And so maybe this image of Paul Simonon smashing his bass into the ground somehow signifies the end of rock and roll. Up next is In Utero by Nirvana from 1993. And for a time, Kurt Cobain floated the idea of calling this a rather dark phrase, I hate myself and I want to die, which was a title that he'd scribbled in one of his journals around 1992. And it was a phrase that Kurt would use whenever people asked him how he was doing. But apparently bassist Chris Novoselic talked Kurt out of using the title, and common sense prevailed, and the album ended up being called In Utero after one of Courtney Love's poems, Kurt's girlfriend at the time. Next up we have Forever Changes by Love from 1967, and this was going to be called The Third Coming of Love, what with it being their third album and all. But that would have been a pretty boring title, and it got changed to Forever Changes after Arthur Lee had heard that a friend of a friend had split up with his girlfriend. And the story went something like, the girl said, "You said you'd love me forever," and the guy said, "Yeah, well, forever changes." Arthur Lee heard that and took the title. Next we have Low by David Bowie from 1977, and this was going to be called New Music, Night and Day. And that was a title that was going to be a personal reflection on David's journey from a dark place into the light. And I think that that title would have suited this album rather well, giving the contrasting style and moods of the two sides of the record. And last but certainly not least is another album that underwent a few name changes. This is Presence by Led Zeppelin from 1976. And this was going to be called Obelisk, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that, which was based on the shape of this mysterious object in the middle of the table. The album was completed shortly before Thanksgiving, so Thanksgiving was a title that was floated around for a while. But the band decided on Presents when it was suggested to them that the force that the band gave off emitted an unexplainable presence. So there you go, 10 much loved albums that underwent a late name change. And I think there's some pretty cool album titles there. When I was doing my research for this, I picked up on a few others, of course. Thriller by Michael Jackson was going to be called Starlight. Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones was going to be called Automatic Changer. And Morrissey's debut album, Viva Hate, was going to be called Education in Reverse. But that's all for today's video, and as always, I'd like to thank everyone who watched this video. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.